here's another episode of Redzx4's Nostalgia Road. Episode 4, Late Night Horror Host. Now, if you were in the early 90s, if you grew up in the 50s, and 60s and 70s and 80s, and somewhat of the 90s, you might have seen a late night horror host. Let's first start with the one that started it all, Vampira. Now, Vampira, if I could remember by the research, the actress who played her was in a costume party where she was dressed up as Mrs. Adams. I guess a TV producer or somebody saw her and said, "Hey, would you like to do this? Would you like to do a show where you show scary-ass movies?" She said yes, and thus history was made. A genre was born. And for many, many years, people who had grown up with the Vampira show. And the show was pretty much like every scary-ass movie she will host, and she will always do that opening where she just walks up in the fog, just walks up and starts screaming for no apparent reason. That was genius right there. And that went on, and then that inspired other people to do this. Male horror hostess as well, like Bob Wilkes. If you've been in the Bay Area, you might have seen Bob Wilkes, who did creature features. That's another thing I want to talk about. All these different states, all these different regions, they used to show creature features horror shows, late night horror shows, and it was with different hosts. If you were in the Bay Area, it was Bob Wilkes. If you were in Florida, it was Dr. Paul Bearer, and so on and so forth. And there were so many, and again, all these late night horror hosts and hostesses, I should say, used to mix humor with comedy, with horror. Some of them were pretty much like, some were good, some were bad. Now here's the one that I despise with every fiber of my being. Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. I despise this woman because she's nothing more but a ripoff of Vampira. And when I think of Elvira, I think of the irate gamer. That's what I think of. Because both characters are rip-offs of two amazing characters. Both characters can't tell a joke to save their own lives. And most of the time, they get things wrong. But the Elvira character got famous. The character was in like a Halloween Havoc commercial with Sid Vicious. She did a beer commercial. She did like 2 movies, some albums. The woman played the character. I don't know the actress's name, so please bear with me. If you were in Philadelphia, you might have seen Saturday Night Dead, Stella. Stella was actually a good horror hostess because she actually had jokes that were timed, and they were perfectly great. Unlike the Elvira character, where her jokes weren't timed, it's pretty much just her running her mouth all day. And then in the early 90s, the horror hosting job started to die down. But there were a few people here and there. I can't remember who. In the late 90s, I think it died down, but then in the early 2000s, you had like public access shows doing this. You had Scarewolf from Saturday Night Fright. I think that's what it's called. I could be wrong on that. Also, there was this witch in Maine. I think it was she had a TV show in Massachusetts, where she's a witch and she's with a werewolf, and she used to do horror hosting. And most of the time, horror hosting, they're really a dying breed. But I also want to talk about Chiller Theater. If you remember that show, if you lived in, I believe, Portland, I believe it was, or Chicago. Chiller Theater was a good show if you've actually seen the show. It has this host where he's living in a castle, and he shows these scary-ass stories and scary-ass movies, and he knows what he was talking about. I just forgot the name of the horror host. But I want to know from you guys, who is your favorite horror host, and what were the memories you had of them? This has been Redzx4. I'm out.